Consider this your last corporate memo. That is what Troy Bennington said to me standing in my office doorway on a Friday afternoon with that smirk I had grown to hate over the past 6 months. His arms were crossed, his designer suit perfectly pressed his entire posture, radiating the entitlement of someone who had never built anything but believed he owned everything. I had given 12 years to this company, helped grow it, from 40 employees to 200, and now the CEO's 28-year-old son was telling me my time was up. He turned and walked away before I could respond, and I sat there frozen, watching 12 years of my life collapse in the span of 30 seconds. The office felt different after Troy left. The afternoon sunlight coming through my window seemed dimmer, colder. I stared at my computer screen without really seeing it, my mind racing through everything that had led to this moment. Troy had arrived 6 months earlier, fresh from finishing his MBA at some prestigious East Coast school whose name he dropped constantly. His father, Richard Bennington, was 63 years old and had been talking about succession planning for the past year. Richard had built this manufacturing company from nothing, and now he wanted to hand it to his son. I understood that. Family businesses worked that way. But Troy was not interested in learning the business. He was interested in remaking it in his own image. In 6 months, he had pushed out 3 senior executives. First, it was David Palmer, our chief financial officer of 15 years. Troy claimed David was not adapting to new financial modeling techniques. Then it was Sharon Wright, VP of Human Resources. Troy said she was too soft on underperformers. Then Marcus Liu, our head of quality control. Troy insisted we needed someone with a more modern approach. Each time Richard had backed his son. Each time the rest of us had watched, nervously wondering who would be next. I picked up my phone and called Audrey Marshall, VP of Sales, and my closest friend at the company. She answered on the second ring. "He just came to my office," I said, without preamble. "What did he say?" "That this is my last corporate memo." Audrey was quiet for a moment. "Brandy, he met with Richard today." I walked past the conference room and heard them talking. Troy said something about deadweight and cleaning house. My stomach dropped. He is serious. Of course he is serious. He has been planning this since he walked through the door. You know what we have to do. What? Roll over and let him win. No. Fight, but carefully. Troy is smart and he is vicious. I spent the weekend at home, unable to sleep. Saturday night I lay awake replaying every interaction I had had with Troy. Sunday I pulled out my employment contract and read through every page. Everything looked standard. No special protections, no golden parachute, just a normal executive employment agreement. I had built the supplier relationships that kept this company running. I had streamlined our operations and saved millions of dollars in efficiency improvements. None of it mattered if Troy wanted me gone. Monday morning I arrived at the office early, determined to face whatever was coming. At 9:30, an email appeared in my inbox. Meeting with HR at 10 o'clock. Troy was copied on the email. That was a power move, making sure I knew he was involved. Before the meeting, I stopped by Walter Green's office. Walter was our VP of Finance, 58 years old, been with the company for 20 years. He looked up when I knocked, and I saw something in his face I had never seen before. Fear. "You heard?" I asked, quietly. He nodded. "Board meeting last week. I was not invited, but I heard about it afterward." Troy presented what he called a modernization plan. It includes replacing senior staff with younger people who think like him. How is Richard letting this happen? Walter leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. "Richard is tired, Brandy. His wife died last year. He is leaning on Troy more than he should. Watch your back in that meeting." The HR meeting was worse than I expected. Pamela Norton, our HR director, sat across from me looking distinctly uncomfortable. Troy sat beside her like he owned the place. Pamela slid a document across the table. "We would like to offer you a voluntary severance package, 6-month salary benefits through the end of the year." I stared at the paper without touching it. Voluntary. Troy leaned forward. "The company is evolving, Brandy. We are moving in a new direction. Your contributions have been appreciated, but we need fresh perspectives. My division is exceeding all performance targets. We are profitable. Our suppliers are happy. What exactly is the problem?" Troy smiled that same smirk from Friday. "It is not about problems. It is about fit. The new direction requires different skills. I am not signing this." "Then we do this the hard way." Troy slid another document across the table. This one was labeled Performance Improvement Plan and dated 2 months earlier. I had never seen it before in my life. I picked it up and read quickly. It claimed I had been underperforming, missing deadlines, causing problems with vendors. There were signatures that looked like mine but were not. There were complaints from people I had never had issues with. "This is fake," I said flatly. "I have never seen this document. These signatures are forged." Troy leaned back in his chair. "We have been documenting your performance issues for months, Brandy. This is all part of your personnel file. We can do this the easy way with a severance package and a neutral reference. Or we can do it the hard way with termination for cause. No severance, no unemployment benefits, and a reference that reflects your performance problems. Your choice." I looked at Pamela, who would not meet my eyes. She was just following orders. I stood up my hands, shaking with rage. "I need time to consider this." "You have until Friday," Troy said. 5 o'clock. I walked back to my office on legs that felt like rubber. Troy had been planning this for months. He had created false documentation. He had built a paper trail that made me look incompetent, and now he was using it to force me out. I sat at my desk and started taking photos of everything with my phone. My real performance reviews all excellent. Emails from Richard praising my work. Supplier feedback commending our partnership. I downloaded files to my personal drive, knowing my computer access could be cut at any moment. Audrey appeared in my doorway 20 minutes later. "I heard. Half the office heard. Brandy, what are you going to do?" "I do not know yet. But I am not going quietly." That evening I stayed late at the office. Most people had gone home. I sat in the dim light of my desk lamp going through old files, looking for anything that could help me. I found myself reviewing supplier contracts. We had dozens of them, but one stood out. Stellar Components, LLC. They provided 70% of our manufacturing parts. The relationship had taken me 5 years to build. Their pricing was exceptional, their quality was perfect, and their reliability was unmatched. The contract was 60 pages long. I had negotiated most of it myself, working directly with Marcus Doyle, the founder of Stellar. Marcus was in his early 70s now, mostly retired, with his daughter Jennifer running day-to-day operations. But 5 years ago, Marcus had been very involved in the negotiation. I remembered one clause he had insisted on, something about change of control. At the time, Richard had balked at it, but I had convinced him to accept it because Stellar's pricing was so good. Richard had signed without reading the fine print. I found it on page 43. The language was dense and legal, but the essence was clear. If the company experienced significant changes in ownership or executive leadership that compromise the business relationship or company direction, Stellar Components had the right to terminate the contract with 90 days' notice or renegotiate terms at significantly higher prices. I read it 3 times, my heart starting to pound. Marcus had told me at the time I do not do business with companies that lose their values. I have been burned twice by corporate takeovers where new management cared more about quarterly profits than long-term relationships. This clause is my insurance. I had buried it in the contract, convinced Richard to accept it, and promptly forgotten about it. Until now. Tuesday morning I called Marcus Doyle. His assistant put me through after a brief wait. Brandy. His voice was warm and gravelly. How are things at the company? Busy as always, I said carefully. I was reviewing some old contracts and came across our agreement. I wanted to touch base on a few details. Sure. What do you need? The change of control clause on page 43. Do you remember insisting on that? Marcus laughed. Of course I remember. I put that clause in every major contract after getting screwed twice. Once by a private equity firm that bought out a partner and immediately tried to renegotiate prices down. Another time by a CEO's nephew who took over and wanted to cut corners on quality. I told myself, never again. So the clause is something you take seriously. Absolutely. If a company changes hands or leadership in a way that threatens our relationship, I want the option to walk away or renegotiate. Why do you ask? Is something happening at your company? I hesitated. There might be some leadership changes coming. Richard is not retiring, is he? Not exactly. But things are shifting. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Richard is a good man. I hope he is not letting some hotshot kid ruin what he built. I did not respond to that. Thanks for clarifying, Marcus. I just wanted to make sure I understood the clause correctly. Anytime, Brandy. You take care. I hung up and sat staring at my phone. Marcus did not know about Troy yet, but he had basically described exactly what was happening. Wednesday morning, I was called to Richard's office. Troy was there too, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Richard looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he seemed to have aged 5 years in the past 6 months. His wife Linda had died of cancer the previous year, and he had never really recovered. Brandy, sit down, Richard said heavily. Saturday. You have been a valuable part of this company for a long time, Richard continued. But Troy has made some good points about needing fresh perspectives. The business world is changing rapidly, and we need to adapt. Troy interrupted. The severance offer expires Friday. After that, we proceed with termination for cause based on the performance issues we have documented. I looked directly at Richard. Have you actually read those performance documents, Richard? Do they match the reality of my work here? Richard would not meet my eyes. Troy has shown me the file. There are concerns. Concerns that did not exist until 2 months ago. Concerns that contradict 12 years of excellent reviews. Troy pushed off from the wall. The business environment has changed. Your past performance does not guarantee future success. I took a breath and decided to play my card. Before you make any final decisions, there is something you should know. The Stellar Components contract contains a change of control clause. Troy frowned. So what? Lots of contracts have boilerplate clauses. This one is not boilerplate. If the company experiences significant leadership changes that compromise our relationship with Stellar, they can terminate the contract with 90 days' notice or demand higher prices. The room went very quiet. Richard sat up straighter. What are you talking about? Page 43 of the Stellar contract. Marcus Doyle insisted on it 5 years ago. I negotiated it. You signed it. Troy's face was turning red. Are you threatening us? I am informing you of a contractual reality. Stellar provides 70% of our manufacturing components, specialized parts with 90-day lead times from alternative suppliers. If Stellar walks production stops, you lose all revenue for at least 3 months. Your plans to go public would collapse. Richard looked stunned. Let me see that contract. Before I could respond, Troy grabbed my arm hard, his fingers digging in painfully. Get out of this office. You are done here. I jerked my arm free, knowing there would be bruises. I am trying to help you understand the situation. Get out, Troy shouted. I left my arm throbbing. Behind me, I heard Richard's voice, quieter now. Did you know about this clause? Troy's response was muffled, but angry. I walked back to my office with my head held high, even though inside I was shaking. I had just declared war. 20 minutes later, my computer went black. Access denied. My badge stopped working. A security guard appeared at my door. Jerome, who had worked here almost as long as I, had looked apologetic. Sorry, Brandy. I have orders to escort you out. You can take personal items. Troy's orders. Jerome nodded. I packed my photo frames and a few personal belongings into a cardboard box. As I was walking through the parking lot, Walter Green appeared beside me. Brandy, wait. He looked around nervously. Troy is in with Richard right now. I overheard him saying you have been embezzling. He has some financial discrepancies, he claims. Prove it. What? That is insane. I know, but he has manufactured something. Be careful. Wednesday evening, my phone rang. Richard Bennington. His voice was cold. There are irregularities in expense accounts you approved. $20,000 over the past 3 months. Richard, those were legitimate vendor payments. I have documentation for every approval. You will get the details from our attorneys. Do not come back to the office. The line went dead. Thursday morning, I sat in the office of Jack Rosenthal, an employment attorney a friend had recommended. I showed him everything. The forged performance documents, the false embezzlement claims, the bruises on my arm from where Troy had grabbed me. Jack reviewed everything carefully. He was in his early 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. You have a strong wrongful termination case, he said finally. Forged documents, false accusations, physical intimidation. But litigation will take 18 months minimum, maybe longer. Can you survive that long without income? My savings will last maybe 6 months. And Troy will destroy your reputation in the industry during that time. By the time we win in court, your career will be over. So what do I do? Jack leaned back in his chair. Tell me more about this stellar clause. I explained it in detail. How Marcus Doyle had insisted on it, how it could give us leverage, how it threatened the company's supply chain. Jack's eyes lit up. That is your leverage, but you need to be strategic. If you approach Stellar now, Troy will claim you are sabotaging the company. You need Stellar to act independently. How? Let them hear about the leadership changes through other channels. Let them invoke the clause on their own. Then, you are not the instigator. I drove to Stellar Components that afternoon. It was a 2-hour drive to their facility in the next state. Jennifer Doyle, Marcus's daughter, and now CEO of Stellar, agreed to meet with me on short notice. Jennifer was 40 sharp and professional. She had her father's business instincts but a more modern management style. I explained the situation carefully. Troy, taking over, pushing out, experienced leadership, changing the company culture, planning aggressive new directions. Jennifer listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "My father always worried about this exact scenario. Richard built something good. His son sounds like he is going to destroy it. The change of control clause could protect you." It could, but invoking it would hurt Richard too. He has been a good partner. Richard is not in control anymore. Troy is. Jennifer tapped her pen on the desk. "Let me talk to my father. We will think about this." Thursday evening, I received an email from the company lawyers. Formal notice of termination for cause. The embezzlement accusations were detailed with manipulated approval records, making my legitimate vendor payments look suspicious. Troy had been planning this for months, building a false case against me. The email ended with a threat. "Sign a full release waiving all claims or face potential criminal charges. Deadline Friday at 5 p.m. I forwarded everything to Jack. Friday morning, I met with Jack again. He was furious. "This is extortion, but proving your innocence will require months of forensic accounting. Meanwhile, you are unemployed and potentially facing criminal charges. What about the stellar clause? It is your only immediate play, but you need stellar to act fast." I called Jennifer Doyle and asked her to invoke the change of control clause immediately. There was a long pause. "Are you sure, Brandy? This will devastate their business. Troy has already devastated mine, and he is going to destroy everything Richard built. Let me call my father." 2 hours later, Jennifer called back. "Dad says do it. He does not want to do business with people who treat employees like this." Relief flooded through me. Then Jennifer continued, "But there is a problem. The clause requires significant leadership change to be proven. Troy is not CEO yet. Richard is still in charge. If we invoke the clause prematurely, they will sue us for breach of contract. We need proof that Troy has actually taken control and that it is harming the business relationship." My relief turned to ice, so the clause cannot help me until Troy officially takes over. But by then I will be completely destroyed. "I am sorry, Brandy. The timing is wrong." I hung up and stared at the wall. I had played my card too early. The leverage I thought I had was useless. Friday afternoon, Audrey called me. She was whispering, "There is an emergency board meeting Monday. Troy is pushing to become chief operating officer immediately. Richard is apparently exhausted and wants to step back. The board is voting on leadership transition." A spark of hope flickered. If Troy becomes COO, that triggers the clause. Maybe. But you are banned from the building. How do you get into that meeting? I called Jack immediately. "Can I demand to be at the board meeting?" Jack thought for a moment. "Actually, yes. Company bylaws require that executives being terminated for cause have the right to address the board before the termination is finalized. It is an obscure provision, but it exists." Then I invoke it. Jack drafted a formal demand letter and sent it at 4:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the deadline to sign the release. The letter invoked my right to address the board and contested the termination. It bought me time and guaranteed my presence at Monday's meeting. Monday morning, I arrived at company headquarters. Security tried to stop me. I showed them Jack's letter and the bylaw requirement. After a tense phone call with someone upstairs, they let me wait in the lobby. I watched board members arrive. There were 8 of them, local business owners, a couple of Richard's old friends, 2 outside investors. They all looked serious. Troy arrived and saw me. His face went dark. He stormed over. "What are you doing here?" "Exercising my rights under company bylaws." "You are making this worse for yourself." His voice was low and threatening. Richard arrived moments later. He looked shocked to see me, and older than I had ever seen him. There were deep lines around his eyes, and his shoulders sagged. The board meeting started at 9 o'clock. Troy presented first. His vision for the company, his modernization, plans his request for the COO title immediately. He was polished and persuasive. The board members nodded along. One board member, Harold Chen, a local manufacturing business owner, asked about the executive transitions. Troy answered smoothly, "We are removing underperformers and bringing in fresh talent. It is necessary for the company to stay competitive." He mentioned my embezzlement as an example of the problems with the old guard. Several board members looked concerned. Then it was my turn. I had 10 minutes to address my termination. I refuted the embezzlement claims, calmly showing my documentation. Real approvals, authentic records, evidence that Troy had manufactured the accusations. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Troy interrupted. "This is slander." Richard quieted him with a hand gesture. Then I changed direction. But there is something more important than my employment. There is a significant risk to the company that the board needs to know about. I explained the Stellar Components contract and the change of control clause, how if Troy became COO, it could trigger the clause. How Stellar could walk, taking 70% of the supply chain. How the company would face immediate crisis. The room erupted. Board members talked over each other. Glenn Porter, the company lawyer, grabbed the Stellar contract and started reading frantically. His face went pale. "She is right," Glenn said. "This clause is enforceable. If Stellar invokes it, we could lose $15 million in revenue next quarter." Richard stood up, and for the first time in months, I saw real anger in his face. "Troy, did you review the supplier contracts before proposing this transition?" Troy backpedaled. "It is not a problem. We can manage it." Glenn shook his head. "Actually, this is extremely serious. If Stellar invokes this clause, it could sink the entire company." The board turned on Troy, firing questions. Troy was losing his composure. "She planted this," he shouted. "She is sabotaging us." Then Audrey Marshall spoke up. She had been sitting quietly as VP of Sales. "I spoke with Jennifer Doyle at Stellar this morning. She called to verify rumors about our leadership change. She specifically asked if Troy Bennington was taking control. She said if that happens, Stellar will immediately invoke the clause." Complete silence. Richard looked at his son. "You backed us into a corner." But Troy, recovering, played his final card. "Then fire Brandy publicly. Show Stellar we are keeping experienced leadership. Problem solved. I will wait 6 months for the COO title. Let things settle down. But Brandy has to go. She created this mess by weaponizing a contract clause against her own company." And incredibly, board members nodded. Troy was spinning this as my fault. Richard looked at me with disappointment. "You would really hurt the company to save yourself." I opened my mouth to respond, but I had no words. I was being framed as the villain. The board voted. Terminate Brandy immediately. Postpone Troy's promotion. Issue a public statement about leadership stability. I had lost. Tuesday morning, I was officially unemployed. The news spread through the industry with shocking speed. My phone buzzed constantly. Former colleagues sending brief, awkward messages. Job recruiters who had called me regularly were suddenly unavailable. Troy had spread his narrative efficiently. She tried to sabotage the company. She used a supplier contract as a weapon. She put her own interests above the business. My reputation was destroyed. I met with Jack at his office. He looked defeated. They outmaneuvered you. Troy made you look vindictive. The board thinks you are the problem now. So what do I do? Take whatever severance they offer and move on. Fighting this will bankrupt you. He cannot get away with this. Brandy, sometimes the bad guys win. I am sorry. I left his office and drove home in a daze. 12 years of my life erased, my reputation shredded, my career over, and Troy was still standing, smirking victorious. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. Jennifer Doyle. I heard what happened at the board meeting, she said. Troy spun it, that I tried to use your contract as a weapon. I am sorry I dragged Stellar into this. That is not why I am calling. After Audrey Marshall contacted me Monday, I started digging. I wanted to understand what was really happening at your company. And I found something interesting. Stellar has been approached multiple times in the past 3 months by companies wanting to buy us or merge with us. We turned them all down. But I noticed something odd. All the inquiries came shortly after Troy joined your company. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? I had my team investigate. Troy Bennington has been secretly meeting with our competitors. He has been trying to arrange alternative supplier relationships. He was planning to dump Stellar after his father retires and replace us with cheaper overseas manufacturers. You have proof. Emails, meeting records, preliminary contracts. Troy was going to betray our partnership. He was planning to cut us out within 12 months. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. He was going to destroy the relationship anyway. Exactly. And that is exactly what my father's clause was designed to prevent. Wednesday evening, Jennifer and Marcus Doyle met me at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. Marcus was 72, with white hair and sharp blue eyes that still missed nothing. He was furious. That entitled brat was going to cut us out after we gave them our best pricing for 5 years. Jennifer showed me the evidence on her tablet. Troy had contacted 3 Chinese manufacturers. He was negotiating deals to replace Stellar within 12 months. He planned to use the cost savings to pad profit margins before taking the company public. He did not care about quality issues or reliability problems. This is exactly what the change of control clause was designed to prevent, Marcus said. Companies that lose their integrity, that forget that business is about relationships, not just transactions. Can you present this to Richard? I asked. Jennifer nodded. I am calling him tomorrow, requesting a meeting with the full board. This is urgent. Thursday morning, Jennifer called Richard directly. She requested an emergency board meeting to discuss the supplier contract. Richard agreed, clearly nervous. The meeting was set for Friday morning. Thursday afternoon, Troy somehow learned about the meeting. He called Jennifer, and she recorded the conversation. He tried to smooth things over, claiming any discussions with other suppliers were just contingency planning. Then he offered her a generous bonus to forget about any misunderstandings. He was trying to bribe her. Jennifer stayed professional and ended the call. Then she sent me the recording. Thursday evening, my phone rang. Walter Green whispering urgently. Troy knows about tomorrow's meeting with Stellar. He just told Richard that Stellar is going to demand a huge price increase. He is claiming Stellar is using the clause to extort the company. He is saying Jennifer and Marcus are conspiring with you to destroy the business. My blood went cold. Is Richard believing him? Yes. They are drafting a lawsuit against Stellar tonight. Richard is planning to sue them tomorrow for breach of contract before Stellar can invoke the clause. I hung up and immediately called Jennifer. Richard is going to sue you tomorrow. Troy convinced him you are extorting them. Jennifer swore. If they sue us, we will have to invoke the clause immediately to protect ourselves. The relationship will be destroyed. The company will collapse. That is exactly what Troy wants. He will position himself as the hero fighting external threats. The board will promote him to save the company. He wins. I had until morning to stop a lawsuit that would destroy everything. Thursday night at 10 p.m., I called an emergency meeting at Jack's office. Jack, Jennifer, Marcus, and Audrey all showed up. We reviewed the situation. Richard planned to sue Stellar at tomorrow's board meeting. Troy had poisoned Richard against them. If the lawsuit happened, Stellar would have to invoke the clause to protect themselves. The company would collapse. Troy would still win by blaming everyone else. Marcus was ready to fight. Let them sue. We will destroy them in court. Jennifer shook her head. A legal battle helps no one. The company dies either way. Our relationship is finished. We both lose. Audrey spoke quietly. Richard is not a bad person. Troy is manipulating him. Richard is exhausted, grieving his wife, leaning on his son because he wants to believe Troy can carry on what he built. He wants to believe in family. Jack proposed a strategy. We need to expose Troy's plans directly to Richard before the board meeting. Show him the evidence privately. Give him a chance to see the truth without the board watching. But how do we get to Richard? I asked. Troy is always with him now. Audrey thought for a moment. Richard plays golf every Friday morning at 6 a.m. Same country club, same routine for 20 years. Even stressed, he never misses it. It is his meditation time. I looked at the clock. It was 11 p.m. Then I meet him at the golf course at 6 a.m. Friday morning at 5:30, I parked at the country club. My membership had been company-sponsored, technically invalid now. I was trespassing, but I had run out of options. Richard arrived at 5:45. He saw me standing near the clubhouse and stopped. His face hardened. You need to leave. I am calling security. 5 minutes. Please, Richard. Just 5 minutes. You have caused enough damage, Brandy. Your son is planning to betray Stellar, and you. That stopped him. What are you talking about? I showed him everything on my tablet. Troy's emails with Chinese manufacturers, the timeline of secret meetings, plans to replace Stellar within 12 months after getting control of the company, the recorded call where Troy tried to bribe Jennifer. Richard's face changed as he read. Anger, to shock, to devastation. He sat down heavily on a bench, suddenly looking very old. He told me he was researching suppliers for contingency planning, Richard said quietly. He was planning to cut them out. After they gave you their best prices for 5 years. After I spent 5 years building that relationship. Maybe there is an explanation. You know there is not. You know what he has become. Richard was quiet for a long time. Finally he spoke. Troy has been pushing hard for changes, firing people I trusted, making aggressive moves I was not comfortable with. But he is my son. He is supposed to take over. I am 63 and tired. His mother died last year, and I thought working together would bring us closer. Instead, I barely recognize him. I stayed quiet, letting him process. What he did to you, Richard continued. The false accusations. I should have questioned it more. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my son was capable. Richard revealed something then that made everything click into place. Troy had been pushing him to sign over controlling interest in the company. For estate planning purposes, Troy had said. The papers were on Richard's desk, ready to sign after today's board meeting. That is why he is pushing the timeline, I said. Once he has controlling interest, you cannot stop him. And that definitely triggers Stellar's change of control clause. He has been engineering this entire sequence. Richard looked broken. He has been playing me. Richard stood up slowly. I need to think. The board meeting is in 3 hours. Richard Troy is planning to sue Stellar today. That is his next move. He will frame it as protecting the company from extortion. Then he will push you to sign over control because of the crisis. Richard closed his eyes. Then his phone rang. Troy. Dad, where are you? We need to prep before the meeting. Richard did not answer. Another call came immediately. Then a text. Dad, the lawyers are here. We need to file the lawsuit against Stellar before the meeting. Where are you? Richard showed me the text. Another message appeared. We have to move fast before they invoke their clause. He is forcing your hand, I said. Trying to start the war before you can think clearly. Richard made a decision. I am going to the office. I am going to stop the lawsuit. But I need you at the board meeting. As a witness. They banned me from the building. I am still CEO. You are reinstated as of right now. Then Richard's phone rang again. Glenn Porter, the company lawyer. Richard Troy just signed the authorization to file the Stellar lawsuit. He used the emergency authority you gave him last week. The lawsuit is already filed. It is done. Richard's face went white. The lawsuit was live filed in court as of 6:15 a.m. Stellar would see it within the hour. They would invoke the change of control clause immediately in response. Everything was collapsing in real time. Richard and I drove separately to company headquarters, both speeding. Richard called an emergency board meeting, moving it up to 7:30 a.m. Board members scrambled to arrive early. Richard called Jennifer Doyle. Do not invoke the clause yet. Give me 2 hours. Jennifer's voice was tight with anger. Richard, you just sued us. Our lawyers are telling us to respond immediately. Please, trust me. 2 hours. 2 hours. That is all. Richard arrived at the office at 7 a.m. Troy was waiting in his office, confident and smiling. The lawsuit is filed. Stellar will back down once they see we are serious. Richard stood behind his desk. You used emergency authority to file without my approval. You gave me that authority. I am protecting the company from extortion. From what a loyal supplier who has never done anything but provide excellent service. Troy's expression shifted slightly. Dad, they are exploiting us with that clause. They have been working with Brandy to leverage it against us. I know about the Chinese manufacturers, the secret meetings, your plans to dump Stellar. Troy went very still. That was just research, he said carefully. Contingency planning. I saw the emails, the contracts you were negotiating, the timeline to replace them within 12 months. Troy's mask slipped. Fine. Yes. Stellar's prices are good but not great. We could save $2 million a year with overseas suppliers. That is good business, Dad. That is what you are supposed to do. By lying to a partner, by destroying relationships, I spent decades building. By making smart business decisions instead of sentimental ones. This is the problem with your generation. You care more about handshake deals and loyalty than profit. Richard stared at his son like he was seeing a stranger. "Get out of my office." "Dad, get out." Board members started arriving at 7:20. They looked confused and annoyed at the early start time. Brandy arrived with Jennifer and Marcus Doyle. Troy saw them and went rigid. "What is she doing here?" "Brandy is reinstated. I am convening this meeting as CEO." "You cannot reinstate her." The board voted to terminate. The board can vote again. At 7:30, everyone assembled in the conference room. The tension was suffocating. Richard stood at the head of the table. Troy sat with his arms crossed, radiating anger. "This meeting is about the future of this company," Richard began, "and about my failure as a leader and as a father." He explained everything to the board, how he had given Troy too much authority too fast, how Troy had systematically pushed out good people, the forged documents against me, the secret negotiations with Chinese suppliers, the plan to betray Stellar, the lawsuit filed this morning without proper authorization. Board members sat in shocked silence, looking between Richard and Troy. Harold Chen spoke up. "Why are we just hearing about this now?" "Because I wanted to believe in my son. I ignored every warning sign." Troy stood up smooth and confident. "Dad, I understand you are emotional. This has been stressful. But let's look at facts. The company needs modernization. Brandy was underperforming. The documentation exists. Stellar's clause is a threat to our stability. Everything I have done is to protect our bottom line and prepare us for growth." Some board members nodded. Troy was persuasive. "And frankly, Dad, you are exhausted, still grieving, not thinking clearly. That is why we discussed you signing over majority control. The company needs strong, clear leadership." Troy was positioning this as Richard having a breakdown, making himself look like the stable one. I stood up. "May I speak?" Richard nodded. Troy filed the Stellar lawsuit to force a crisis. He knew they would have to invoke their clause in response. The company would face immediate supply shortage. In that crisis, he would push Richard to sign over control and position himself as the hero managing the emergency he created. Then within 6 months, he would replace Stellar with cheaper overseas suppliers, cut corners, pad profit margins, make the company look good for a public offering, and sell his shares at a premium. He would leave the company to collapse later from quality issues and broken relationships. The room was silent. Jennifer Doyle stood and presented the evidence. Emails meeting records the recorded bribery attempt. Marcus spoke with the weight of 45 years in business behind his words. "I have seen operators like this before. They burn everything down for short-term gain." Glenn, the lawyer, looked at the evidence. This could be fraud, potentially criminal fraud against the company. Troy, seeing the room turning against him, played his final card. "Fine, I was aggressive, but I was trying to save this company. That Stellar clause is a ticking time bomb. It gives them too much power over us. We need to break free of it, even if it is painful short-term." Richard responded quietly. "Or we honor our agreements and maintain our integrity." I was holding the Stellar contract, reviewing it one more time. Suddenly, something caught my eye. A subsection I had not paid attention to before. My hands started shaking. "Wait, there is more to the clause." Everyone turned to me. I read aloud. "However, this clause shall be nullified if the company demonstrates continued commitment to existing business practices and values through board resolution affirming same." The room went silent. "It is a good faith provision," I continued. If the board formally votes to maintain the company's existing ethical standards and partnership approach, the clause becomes unenforceable. Marcus put in an escape hatch. Marcus smiled. I told you I am not unreasonable. I just wanted insurance against bad actors. If Richard and the board commit to doing business the right way, the clause does not apply. It was never about control. It was about values. Richard looked at the board. We need to vote on several matters. First, withdraw the lawsuit against Stellar immediately. Second, pass a resolution affirming our commitment to ethical business practices and existing partnerships. Third, remove Troy from all operational authority. Fourth, reinstate Brandy with back pay and a formal apology. Troy exploded. You cannot do this. I am your son. Richard said quietly, that is exactly why this is so painful. But I cannot let you destroy what we built. The board voted. Lawsuit withdrawn unanimous. Ethics resolution unanimous. Troy's removal 7-1, with only Troy voting against. My reinstatement unanimous. Troy stormed toward the door, then turned back. I will sue you. All of you. Richard said softly. If you do, I will testify against you. Troy left, slamming the door. Jennifer and Marcus shook hands with Richard. The lawsuit was formally withdrawn within the hour. Stellar agreed to continue the partnership under the existing terms. Marcus put his hand on Richard's shoulder. The clause did its job. It protected what matters. Not just the contract, but the relationship behind it. 2 weeks later, I sat in my office looking out at the parking lot. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. The company had stabilized. Richard announced he would stay as CEO for 2 more years to ensure a proper transition. He was already working with a search firm to identify external candidates for succession. No more family succession plans. Troy had taken a position with a venture capital firm in California. He left without saying goodbye to his father. Richard looked older now, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was peace in his face that had not been there before. Richard stopped by my office that afternoon. He knocked on the open door and I waved him in. How are you settling back in? He asked. It feels strange. Like I never left, and like everything is different at the same time. Richard nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Thank you for not giving up. You saved this company. And maybe you saved my son from himself, though he does not see it that way yet. I hope someday he understands. Me too. Richard looked out the window. I should have listened earlier. I should have questioned more. I wanted so badly to believe that Troy could carry on what I built. I wanted to believe in family. You were grieving. Troy took advantage of that. That does not excuse my blindness. Richard turned back to me. But I learned something through all of this. The buried clause in that contract taught me something important. I waited. It was not really about the contract, Richard said. It was about what the contract represented. Marcus put that clause in because he values integrity over profit. He wanted to do business with people who share those values. The clause was not a trap or a weapon. It was a mirror. It reflected back what kind of company we really were. I thought about that. When Troy tried to take over, the clause activated because it sensed the values changing. Exactly. And when we recommitted to integrity, the clause disappeared. It was always about choice, about who we choose to be. Richard left, and I sat alone in my office thinking about everything that had happened. The buried clause had almost destroyed me. It had almost destroyed the company, but in the end, it had saved both. Marcus Doyle had been smart. He had not built a weapon into that contract. He had built a test. a way to measure whether a company was staying true to its values. The clause activated when integrity was threatened and deactivated when integrity was restored. I picked up the stellar contract from my desk and flipped to page 43, that dense legal language about change of control. I understood it differently now. The strongest agreements are not about control or leverage. They are about mutual respect and shared values. Marcus had created a clause that said, "I will work with you as long as you stay true to who you are. If you lose yourself, I walk away." That was not a threat. That was a gift. Sometimes the thing you think will destroy you is actually the thing that saves you. The buried clause had terrified me when Troy tried to use it against me. But that same clause had ultimately exposed Troy's plans and protected the company. I had learned something profound through all of this. In business and in life, the deepest protections are not rules or contracts. They are values. When you compromise your values for short-term gain, you lose everything that matters. When you hold firm to your values even when it costs you, you discover what you are really made of. Troy had chosen profit over people, transactions over relationships, manipulation over integrity. He had seemed to be winning for months, but in the end his approach had collapsed because it was built on sand. Richard had built this company on relationships and trust. When he lost sight of that, everything started to fall apart. When he returned to those foundations, everything stabilized. The buried clause was Marcus's way of ensuring he only worked with people who understood this truth. It was genius, really, a self-enforcing ethics agreement. I looked around my office. The same desk, the same view, but I saw it all differently now. I had come so close to losing everything. My job, my reputation, my career. I had been pushed to the edge. But I had also discovered something about myself. I had discovered I would not compromise my integrity, even when it seemed like the only way to survive. I had fought back, not with lies or manipulation, but with truth and evidence. I had won not by destroying others, but by exposing what was already there. That was the real lesson. The buried clause had not neutralized Troy. Troy had neutralized himself by being someone the clause was designed to stop. All the clause did was reveal the truth. I turned to my computer and started working through the emails that had piled up during my suspension. There was work to do, relationships, to rebuild trust, to restore. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was doing work that mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Audrey. "Lunch tomorrow, I want to hear the whole story." I smiled and texted back, "Absolutely. I owe you big time." The afternoon sun slanted through my office window, warm on my desk. Outside, the parking lot was filling up as the day shift arrived. Life was moving forward. I thought about Troy, somewhere in California, probably still angry and convinced he had been wronged. Maybe someday he would understand. Maybe someday he would realize that his father had given him a gift by stopping him. That being prevented from destroying a company was not punishment, it was salvation. But that was his journey to make. Mine was here in this office, doing the work I loved with people I respected, building relationships based on trust, honoring agreements, staying true to values even when it cost something. The buried clause had taught me that business is not really about contracts and negotiations. It is about character, about who you are when no one is watching, about whether you value people or just profit. Marcus Doyle understood that. Richard Bennington understood that. And now, after nearly losing everything, I understood it too. Sometimes the most important clauses are not the ones on page 1 of a contract. They are the ones buried deep, easy to overlook. The ones that only matter when your character is tested. The ones that reveal who you really are. I had passed that test. Not perfectly, not easily, but I had passed it. And that was worth more than any paycheck. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever faced a situation where doing the right thing seemed like it would cost you everything? Have you ever had to choose between your values and your career? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to hear more stories about integrity, courage, and the hidden clauses in life that test what we are really made of. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that standing up for what is right is never the wrong choice, even when it feels like you are standing alone. Take care, and remember that your values are worth fighting for.